And then I'll say, welcome everybody. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Joe Brewer. I'm here in Barichara, Colombia. And sitting on my friend's permaculture glamping site, a place called Guaymaro, because I'm gonna meet with some people after this to do the work that we'll be talking about today. Just I'm meeting our neighbors to talk about how we can coordinate across the various farms and land in this area to enable us to restore an entire watershed and to do work at a larger scale than an individual project. And so I'm really excited to have you all here today because this is our first webinar in this new learning journey. And we're going to have the opportunity to explore a lot of different topics in the next 8 weeks. And what I want to do today is sort of give us, I can hear my own voice echoing. Is that from my computer? Is that from someone else's? Just in case, if everyone would mute themselves, just in case it happened to be on someone else's, because I'm not sure where that's coming from. But that would be helpful.
I think it's Kathy's mic.
Oh, okay.
Mic, yeah.
Kathy, if it's okay, I'm going to mute you. Apologies for that. Thank you. Kathy's my friend. She doesn't mind if I do that, I hope. Thank you, Kathy. I'm really excited because what we're about to do is begin a process that we've been doing for about a year now here at Earth Regenerators, which is to hold a pattern of relationships for 8 weeks that allows us to form deep and meaningful friendships. And so most times when you join an online course, the focus is on what is the content you're going to learn? What is the knowledge? What are the tools you're going to gain? And we're going to have that too. But we've actually found what's more important is how we relate to each other and how we're going to practice in the next 8 weeks, building relationships among us so that we can explore really complex and sometimes really emotionally challenging topics. Because the world today is a complex and messy place, which we'll talk a little bit today in the webinar. And we're going to have some pretty big challenges ahead for us. So we're going to have to get really good at relating to each other and dealing with difficult emotions. So I want to start by saying this because what we're going to be discussing in this learning journey is how can we form prosocial. So we'll be learning what a prosocial group is and what it means to be prosocial and how to cultivate capacities to co-create among different human beings and form effective groups. And we're going to be doing this at the scale of entire bioregions or entire territories. So we're going to be exploring how to bring the level up from anyone's individual project to the scale of watersheds and mountain ranges, to coastal estuaries, to things that actually enable entire ecosystems to flourish, or our failure to achieve that level causes those ecosystems to collapse, which is what's happened on more than half the Earth's land surface and most of the world's ocean throughout the last 200 years. And so I want to just start by saying that the way that we're going to do the webinar today is I'm going to give a presentation for about 20 or 25 minutes, and then we'll have time for discussion afterwards. Right now, there are about 50 people on the call, so if you could mute your mic just in case some sound appears in the background, that'll be helpful for the rest of us. And what I want to really invite is that even from this moment, start noticing who the other participants are that you find interesting that you might like to connect more with. Because a lot of times we have this model of education that says the teacher is the smart one who knows stuff, and the students are the ones who may be smart, but they're ignorant. And
You're frozen, Joe.
Oh, I'm not frozen for me. Am I frozen for anyone else? Can others see me?
You're back.
Now you're back.
All right, well, we may end up with some problems with connectivity, and so we'll do the best we can with that. I'm in a place that usually has good internet, but there are also a few other people who may be on it. And I'm not in my house, which also has these problems sometimes. And yeah, so what I want to really emphasize is that we're going to learn how to learn from each other. And that means we're going to be taking the topic of how to act prosocially and co-create to larger scales. And we're going to apply that to ourselves and practice it throughout the next 8 weeks. And you'll see that in the format of our community calls and the way that we'll be using them. So for right now, what I'd like to do is just start with an opening presentation that helps us to create a shared context of understanding what we've come here to do. And then from the shared context, we'll be able to start exploring what are going to be some pretty advanced and difficult topics. Things that are, I would say, at the level of the problems. So instead of trying to simplify the world to human comprehension, we want to increase our ability to learn together so that we can manage the complexity of the real world. And so with that in mind, I'd love to just start the presentation portion of today's session. So go over here, minimize this. Come on, and yeah. All right, so what we're going to be talking about in the next 8 weeks is how to form pro-social groups for territories. And I found this beautiful image of the continent of Africa mapped as rivers, where you can see that one way of thinking about territories is the function of landscapes, which can include when water falls onto the surface of land, which direction does it flow and how does it accumulate before it eventually rejoins the ocean. And so this is a nice way of thinking that territories here doesn't mean something small scale, like say the territory of my backyard, but rather the territory of my territory, to work at these larger scales, which are going to be essential for us to restore ecosystem functions and to create resilience after all of the degradation and devastation that's already happened around almost all of the planet. And I can hear that my window, I had a window open that is still making noise. So let me close that real quick. Apologies for that. There we go. I thought I'd close that. I missed one. So now, jumping in. What I want to begin with is a soothing picture, but a soothing picture of something that I think captures the state of the world today. And that is that even in times when the world appears to be immensely beautiful and we can be lost in a feeling of reverence and awe for how gorgeous it is, even in those moments there can be violent or intense things happening, like this storm that's smashing down over the mountain. And what we can feel in the world today is that there's an intensity of changes occurring that are happening in such a severe way that they could overwhelm us and cause us to lose sight of the beauty. And so I wanted to start with this image to just remind us that even in the midst of the most intense storms, if we know how to look, we can find beauty in the world around us. And that's going to help us to carry forward and continue during the difficult times. And I say that because while things have been difficult in the past, all signs tell us that the future is going to be even more difficult. And the dangers are only going to grow, at least for the next few decades. And so what I want to really stress here is that Earth Regenerators is a design school that doesn't work like a normal sustainability focus. And that is that we need to find a way to restore health and well-being to the planet as the Earth continues through ecological overshoot and the human population grows to its maximum point and then quickly plummets and collapses. Many people in the sustainability space like to pretend that our planetary biosphere does not follow the rules of ecology and that this pattern will not occur, as though we can have a really high human population and reduce biodiversity as much as we want and just sustain it permanently. But all evidence of any other ecosystem tells us that that's absolute fantasy. And that the truth is that we're in the midst of an overshoot and collapse process that has occurred regionally for every civilization in the last 12,000 years. And there's no reason for us to believe that the current globalized system will be anything different. And what that means is we are approaching the top of a collapse curve for the human population. And as we approach the top of that, what's going to happen is that unsustainable cultures all over the world will become compost for the Earth's biosphere. And as this occurs, as frightening as it may be to say, it's simply the truth about the state of the world. Those of us who seek to be regenerators of the Earth need to learn how to take a different path that builds different models of economics and livelihoods so that as the human population crashes, it doesn't go to zero and cause humans to go extinct. Now you might notice I'm not pulling any punches here. I'm not going to sugarcoat the situation or pretend that we can have some kind of a techno-utopian future that really has no basis in reality. I've studied ecology, and I've studied Earth system science, and I've studied the limits to growth and other studies that look at the planetary system and its interdependencies, and all of them show that this is the only scientifically realistic scenario of the next century. And so as we really internalize and grapple with the grief and the pain that this causes us, we have to find ways to heal and sustain ourselves throughout an intensifying collapse process that is going to last for several decades, which basically means for the rest of all of our lives. And as we attempt to live through this planetary collapse process, which is already well underway, those of us who want to regenerate the Earth need to keep the human population from going to zero. And that is a pretty intense and sobering message. And I think that anything less would be dishonest when we're starting this learning journey. And so I want to really just say, this is how serious I am about finding solutions that work in what some would say are worst case scenarios, when actually the scenario that looks like this is what is called business as usual in all of the global systems models. Business as usual, which is exactly what we've continued doing for the last 50 years without changing course even in the slightest, has carried us to the point where this is now unavoidable. And while we might have been able to avoid it sometime by the mid-1980s, it's been too late already for decades because of latency effects and lag times in the global system. So I wanted to start with this because what we need to do is find a way through this difficult time. And that brings us, once my computer wakes up and starts responding, so I can move to the next slide. Will that allow me to do that? There we go. This brings us to the planetary boundaries framework. The planetary boundaries is a framework developed by the Stockholm Resilience Center. This is a network of several thousand Earth system scientists, and they asked a very specific question. What are the dynamic processes of our planet that need to be kept in some range of stability so that it's possible to have a globalized economy? And what they found is that there are 9 of these processes, and they named them, and they called them the planetary boundaries. For example, climate change, biosphere integrity, which measures biodiversity loss, land system change, which is the degradation of ecosystems, freshwater use, and so on. And then they said, well, if there are 9 of these, and if we cross even one, well, okay, where are we? And this research was published in 2015, and what they found was that we had already crossed 4. And so if we cross even one, planetary civilization is already in the midst of collapse. It's impossible to sustain it. This is saying the Holocene, for those of you who know your geology, that it's impossible to stay within the Holocene of having warm, stable climate for multiple thousands of years. Just to give you a sense of how big a deal that is, agriculture came into being during the Holocene and never existed before, and we have no evidence that it'll exist after. So that's how serious this is. So in 2015, they found that we'd crossed 4. Remember, if we cross even one, planetary civilization is impossible. So last year, they said they're updating their research, they've gathered more data, and they're about to add 2 more. Freshwater use and ocean acidification have also been crossed, which brings us up to 6 of the 9. But of course, that's peer review research. It takes time for it to be published. So they probably won't officially declare that until sometime next year, even though it's just in the peer review process and the research has already confirmed it. But then about 3 months ago, they added number 7, novel entities, which is microplastics, which are now ubiquitous in every ecosystem on Earth. And they filled the world's ocean and are causing the base of the food chain, phytoplankton, to be at risk of collapsing, which would cause a mass extinction event similar to the one when oxygen filled the Earth's atmosphere several hundred million years ago and caused 90% of species to go away within the span of a few 100,000 years. Except here, we're talking about it happening in the span of 200 years, caused by human activities. So when I say that we're in planetary collapse and the human population is about to go down, it's because of research like this. This is not some crack who's just spouting conspiracy theories. This is mainstream research aggregated by several thousand academic researchers from the world's best universities and research centers all over the planet. And this is mainstream scientific research. So, well, this is the context that we're in. This is the reality of the present day. And what we need to figure out how to do is turn a map like this into something positive. This map shows the degraded areas of land on the land surface of the planet. And what you can see is every map that's colored in is a place that is not an intact ecosystem, but instead is degraded. And the thing you might notice—
Joe.
Yes, Claire?
Joe, you're not sharing your screen, by the way.
I'm not. I am sharing my screen.
I can see it, Claire.
I see
Oh.
it.
Claire, everyone else can see it. I don't
Okay,
know what's
sorry.
going on. That's strange. I don't know why I can't see a screen on your computer. Maybe
I think
exit
it's
and
just
come
mine.
If you
Sorry.
exit and come back in, perhaps.
Yeah.
So what I want to show is that this graphic shows us that there's somewhere between 3.5 and 4.5 billion hectares of land on the Earth's surface that are degraded. It's currently about 37% of the land area of the Earth, if you don't include Antarctica. And what I want to suggest is that there is a reverse meaning of this graph. This image shows us how degraded the Earth's surface is, but it also shows us a global map of regenerative potential, that we can take 4 billion hectares of degraded land and regenerate them. So if you happen to live in any place on this map that is colored in, you have an opportunity to restore ecosystem functions to a level that they used to exist at sometime in the past. Although you probably won't be able to do that while there's a huge human population and large population centers in cities. And this is why the population collapse is going to be necessary for regenerating the Earth, even though that's a really bitter pill to swallow. But I wanted to show this graph to just give you a sense that we actually are capable of thinking at a planetary scale and coordinating ourselves around information like this to try to achieve planetary outcomes, even though the challenge before us is absolutely immense in scale and complexity. So how did the world come to be this way? I like to say that the root cause of our planetary crisis is runaway cultural evolution that culminated in a globalized system of wealth extraction within the human species that arose throughout the last 500 years through colonialism and globalism, as empires and civilizations formed trade networks of extraction around the world, all of which was intensified by fossil fuels, but was underway before fossil fuels were used. And that it is this pattern that is inherently self-destructive, and I would argue it's already in the process of killing itself and dying, because this is a pattern that behaves like cancer in the body of a multicellular organism, that either the organism gets rid of the cancer and stops it spreading, or the organism is killed by the spreading of cancer. And what we can see here is that if the organism is the globalized economy, it is cancer and it's in the process of killing itself. And the best measure we have for that is those planetary boundaries that form the ecological basis of this model of human organization. And so it's this system that needs to go away. And we'll be exploring throughout the next several weeks and through the rest of our lives how to create regenerative economies that are alternatives to this. And that's going to be a key focus for us in this learning journey. A conceptual way of thinking about our moment in history is this, that right now there are several extractive cultures, human cultures in the world, and those extractive cultures have grown very, very large. There's also a remaining number of regenerative cultures, which is what we generally call the indigenous peoples of the earth. Although there are also permaculture communities and other groups that are not specifically indigenous that are seeking to be regenerative. And right now there's a large diversity of extractive cultures and regenerative cultures. And as the global system collapses and the human population crashes, our goal is to come out the other side with all extractive cultures in the past and only regenerative cultures in the future, which means wherever we are, we need to help create these regenerative cultures. And that's going to be a major focus of this learning journey, is what is a regenerative culture and how do we create them at the territorial scale. So just to start showing you how you can think about these massive scale problems, is that we can actually organize our territorial efforts around larger scale patterns. So that little red star on the top of the Andes, at the top of this picture of South America, is where I live in Barichara, Colombia. So just to say, I am in one of these territories, but there are many other territories throughout South America. And you could draw a similar map of territories in other continents. But in South America, the two defining geologic features are the Andes running along the western side of the continent and the Amazon basin that gathers a large number of rivers together on the east side of the continent. And if we were to start organizing all of the watersheds within this continent and then create coordination across the network of these watershed level territories, that we could actually work to regenerate an entire continent. In each region, we regenerate our own territory, but the territories help each other to learn how to improve what they're doing so that a network spread across an entire continent can emerge. And this is a very powerful way of realizing that our local efforts can have planetary consequences by learning how to put ourselves into networks that scale upwards to territorial, continental, and then planetary scales. And we'll be exploring in more depth what it means to do this and how this is actually possible to achieve a little bit later in this learning journey. And of course, if you do this on one continent, then you can spread and do it across all continents. And notice spreading across all continents doesn't mean I, Joe, who's in Colombia, goes and spreads it across all continents. It means I stay in Colombia, but someone else is in Rwanda, someone else is in South Africa, someone else is on Vancouver Island in British Columbia, someone else is in the Hudson Valley, etc., etc. That the idea is each of us can become part of a territory and work to regenerate it. And if enough of us do this, we will have a geographic spread across the planet on all of the continents of the Earth, including possibly Antarctica as more of the ice melts from it. But that's a bit of a hypothetical question at the moment. So you can see the idea here is if we can learn how to do this within any territory, then every territory on Earth can learn how to do it with their own people figuring it out. And a lot of what we want to do in this learning journey is build our capacities to think and act in this way. So there are more territories doing it than there currently are. Another way of thinking about this is through an example that happened during the Dark Ages, when a lot of knowledge was lost, but there were places, and this is primarily focused on Europe, there were places where monasteries were kept that maintained ancient scrolls and ancient knowledge, and there were places of continuity of important knowledge. The monasteries were the wisdom holders of the Dark Ages for Europe and the civilizations of that time. What we want to think about is that regenerative economies organized as bioregions become the wisdom holders of today. And this example is where I live in Barichara, Colombia, where we're working on creating networks of regenerative farms, doing water retention and soil building projects. We have community reforestation projects, forest schools with children, a lot of different kinds of activities spread throughout our territory. And the more that we can organize them and create coherence across them, the more we work at the territorial scale. And so the idea here is that the network of these local projects and all of the learning that happens within them becomes the wisdom holding of the territory. And that this is a model that can be developed for preserving knowledge through disruptions and collapses that are going to occur in the years ahead. I wanted to also emphasize that we're not speaking hypothetically or dreaming about whether this can happen. It's actually already been done. And so I want to start with this quote by Masanobu Fukuoka, who developed the methods of natural farming in Japan. And he has this amazing insight. And his insight's so powerful, I want to read the quote to you directly. He says, "It was in an American desert that I suddenly realized that rain does not fall from the heavens. It comes from the ground. Desert formation is not due to the absence of rain, but the rain ceases to fall because the vegetation has disappeared. Building a dam in the middle of the desert is like trying to treat only one symptom, but the only way to increase rainfall is to learn how to regenerate old forests." He had the insight that water cycles hydrologically through a process called evapotranspiration in the vegetative cover of the land surface, which lowers atmospheric pressure and makes it easier for clouds to arrive, which brings more rain. And so by increasing vegetation through reforestation, you bring the rain. And this is how you reverse desertification. And this is exactly what was done in China in the Los Plateau between 1984 and 2012, where they took this heavily degraded desert environment on the left and turned it into this lush regenerative agriculture valley, all within the span of about 25 years. And this is on the scale of 150,000 hectares. This is a very large project that was done in China and demonstrates a proof of concept that this actually can be done. And so what we're going to learn how to do in this learning journey, and then those of us who take our lives forward in this way, is how to create these large-scale regenerative projects. So what I mean to say is this really can be done. And we don't need to wait for political leaders or for billionaires or for anyone else. We are the ones who feel the need to answer this call. And we are the ones we've been waiting for. We can do this by learning how to collaborate with each other. And one thing we're going to emphasize in this learning journey is how to create the conditions for cooperation, emotionally and psychologically, socially, in terms of how we manage our projects and ourselves. And the more we do this, the better we'll become at creating large-scale impacts. And I want to say also that there's a key focus on all of this for education. And I want to share with you one of the key insights that came from a famous study from the early 1970s called Limits to Growth, which was the first attempt to study the global system and that showed that business as usual would lead to planetary collapse and the collapse of the globalized economy. And what they found was that in each agroeconomic region, or each bioregion as we might call it, it's so unique that you really can't transfer technology from one place to another. What you really need to do is transfer the capacity to develop appropriate solutions. Here they say technology and institutions, but to transfer the capacity to develop appropriate solutions for that bioregion within the region itself, which means we need to create bioregional learning centers in each of these regions. Said another way, out of all of the work that they did collaborating between about 30 different universities between 1972 and 1983, and this is from Dana Meadows, who's famous as one of the founders of systems thinking. She said, out of all this work came a vision of a number of centers where information and models about resources and the environment are housed. There would need to be many of these centers all over the world, each one responsible for a distinct bioregion. So basically, to create this prosocial work at the territorial scale, we need to organize ourselves around how we learn together and how we learn for the culture and ecology of each place. And this is the only possible way to create planetary sustainability. So each bioregion needs to be treated as its own whole system and its own model for its own regeneration. But of course, we can cultivate exchanges between bioregions and form planetary networks, which is a nice thing about us being in more than one territory. But each territory needs to have its own learning capacities to manage itself at the territorial scale. So I want to stop for a moment and just point out a really important thing, which is there's a great falsehood, a great lie that lingers that says that human culture is separate from ecological healing, as though, you know, if only we planted more trees, we'd address the climate crisis. We can ignore the problems in human culture. It turns out that's just absolutely not true. The reality is that if we break down the artificial separation between human culture and ecological healing, we'll recognize that human culture is sick, and that's why we damage the environment. And that as we heal ourselves, we heal our landscapes. Also, as we heal our landscapes, we heal ourselves. So the truth is that we have to learn how to heal ourselves to heal the rest of nature. And there's no separation of the pathologies of human culture, and the mental illnesses and the health problems of human cultures, and the same problems expressed in degraded environments that were damaged by human hands. The truth is that we have to learn how to relate in healthy ways, or else we will destroy the very conditions for our own livelihoods, which is what's happening at present at a planetary scale. I want to give an example of what I'm talking about. And actually, it's funny, I'm giving this webinar from right on the edge of this land that I'm calling Barichara Ecoversity. This is a piece of land, it's 10 hectares in size. This morning, we officially completed the purchase of this land and are now officially the stewards and guardians of it. And this land is the place we're going to establish the Barichara Ecoversity, which is a bioregional learning center for our territory. And what I want to stress is that this is not a 10-hectare reforestation project or a learning center in its own right. This is a node of connectivity for the territory. And I want to show you how that works with this image. That the land I just showed you is in the tiny square here where it says Barichara Ecoversity. And what I want you to notice is there are about 300 hectares of land above that drains into what used to be a permanent stream that has dried up. And there are about 500 hectares of land below in the lower drainage. So simply by having the ecoversity on this land, we can attempt to regenerate 1,000 hectares of land to bring a river back to life, which is actually one of the objectives for this land. So we're already thinking at the territorial scale and where we have situated ourselves within the context of a river basin. And that this way of thinking is going to be critical for how we form patterns of cooperation in the future. And now let's go one scale larger. Here in my bioregion in the Northern Andes, we're looking at something on a very large scale. And so I want you to see that there are 3 mountain ranges here in this part of the Northern Andes, which I've colored in here. And these mountain ranges create giant walls. They're so tall that when clouds run into them, they rise up and lose all of their moisture by creating precipitation. And then they create rain shadows on the other side because the moisture can't continue, which means the moisture will need to come in from somewhere and pass through. This green area that I've colored here in the middle is a plateau that's about 50,000 hectares in size, and it includes the village of Barichara where I live. And this plateau is heavily deforested, making it dry and exposed, where hot, dry air remains, and this inhibits rain formation and is causing it to become a desert. This is because the moisture that comes from the Pacific Ocean, which is to the west in this photo, has to come into the south of the mountain range. And I showed this in inverse, so north is to the bottom and south is to the top. All that means is moisture from the Pacific Ocean has to come in where these arrows show it can enter. It can't come in anywhere else because the mountains are too tall. But once it comes in, it rolls up against the mountains on all sides and creates a rotational circle within these 3 lines of mountains. And this entire area is about 500,000 hectares in size. And where Barichara Ecoversity is basically where this X is located. So what I just showed you with that 1,000 hectares of land for regenerating a river is embedded within a 50,000 hectare plateau and a 500,000 hectare climate system. The regional climate is 500,000 hectares. And as we attempt to connect our reforestation projects across the territory, our goal is to design for intentional climate change, reverse desertification, and stabilize this entire region as a regenerative economy. And so the Barichara Ecoversity has the mission of creating a regenerative economy at this scale of 500,000 hectares and at an ecological scale of mountain ranges, river systems, and regional climate. And when we think at this scale, we have to be really good at collaborating or else we're not going to accomplish anything. It doesn't matter how good I am personally at permaculture on 10 hectares of land when the scale of the work is 500,000 hectares. But I just wanted you to see the thinking and the scale of my project to see that as we explore things in the next 8 weeks, that we'll have this example and the learnings that we've been developing here in Barichara, along with others of you who I know from your responses to the registration form. Several of you are already working on territorial scale projects on other parts of the planet, and we're going to get a chance to all learn from each other. But I just wanted you to see that this is an example of territorial scale or bioregional regeneration, and it's immensely complex and cannot possibly be done without a lot of cooperation. Luckily, there are people like these friends of mine here who have been gathering and doing some of this work. So there's my friend Makaya, Maritza, Charlie, Pedro, Carlos. These are all friends of mine that live in Barichara. And they've been gathering together to bring musicians and artists, chefs, ecological designers, regenerative agriculture practitioners, and others to figure out how do we map the territory, how do we build relationships with each other, and how does a shared identity of the territory emerge among us so that we all recognize what our North Star is so we can move toward the same objectives. And while these are just 5 of the lovely friends I have in Body Charter, there are a lot more people than this that are doing this work. And we're gradually growing our capacities to work together at this large scale. So wherever you are, you'll need to think, who are your local group of friends and collaborators that you'll be working with to do this kind of work? Now, really briefly, I wanted to start to introduce what a prosocial group is. And we'll explore this in much more depth later. But really, prosocial signifies that there is a living energy within the dynamic relationships of people to be together and to create together. This means that people cultivate a shared vision, they have passion for what they're doing, they become more generous, there's a presence of trust, they find themselves engaging with and collaborating together, and more. But the idea here is that prosocial groups are when human beings come together. Actually, ants can come together as prosocial groups for their colony, bees can for their hives. You don't have to limit this to humans, although we'll primarily be focusing on humans because that's who we need to manage. We need to manage ourselves. But I just wanted to say to you that prosocial groups are living energies between members of the group who express these kinds of qualities, which means when you join a prosocial group, your feeling of aliveness goes up. Your heart opens more. You feel more passion, more generosity. You're more inclined to be trusting and to engage in the work. And you're also going to help others in the group to do the same. And groups that aren't prosocial will diminish all of these things. They'll cause you to feel fragmentation and polarization, that you have scarcity and competition. People don't trust each other and that they're fighting, that you feel less engaged and morale goes down, and so forth. And we need to feel into this living energy of being in groups to learn how to cultivate these capacities to be more effective at it in the future. And so, what are we going to do in this learning journey? In a conceptual map and just a simple sequence in the next 8 weeks, what we're going to do is we're going to begin to explore what it means to work at these territorial scales. We're going to explore this through the story of place, through integrated landscape management, through things like watershed and ecosystem restoration, through community engagement and community development. We're going to explore through multiple lenses what it means to work at territorial scales. But as we do that, we as participants are going to grow our own capacities to be prosocial, our own capacities to find shared vision and passion, to be generous and altruistic, to collaborate with each other, to find love and trust between us, and to live this way a little bit more than we used to. And then as we move toward the end of these 8 weeks, we want to find or create the social supports that allow us to continue after the 8 weeks are over. And luckily, Earth Regenerators has cultivated a lot of social supports already, which we'll share with you throughout the next 8 weeks. But there may be supports that don't exist yet that we'll need to create. So I just wanted to let you know that this is the basic sequence. In the span of 8 weeks, we want to explore what it means to work at these large scales, grow our own capacities to be prosocial so that we can do this work wherever we live, and then find the social supports to continue so that this isn't an 8-week learning journey. You've got your little stamp of a certificate that says you learned something, and then you're left to just float in the wind on your own. We want to create the social supports to continue this work and to practice being prosocial and to build roots down, dig roots down into whatever territory you call home, or to help you find a home if you don't have one. So, just as a little reminder, these learning journeys have a basic structure with a weekly rhythm, which is that on Saturdays, we have a weekly webinar, which is at 1 p.m. Central US. So the first one is happening right now. And then we have 3 community Zoom calls that are at different times to accommodate time zones around the world. And so there's one at 6 p.m. on Sunday, which is really good for Monday morning for people in Australia and Southeast Asia and for Oceania. There's one at 11 a.m. on Mondays, which is pretty good for people in Europe. And there's one at 4 p.m. on Mondays, which is good for people in the United States and in South America, in the Americas. And so what I want to say here is you can join as many of the community calls as you like. The webinars will always be recorded so that you'll be able to watch it afterwards if you don't make it to one of them live. And every week we will repeat this rhythm of coming together for provocations and learning on Saturdays, and collaboration and dialogue and getting to know each other on Sundays and Mondays. And so if you haven't signed up for any community calls yet, go to the course page of this learning journey and sign up for at least one of them. And sign up for as many as you like, and come as often as you like. And just so you know, for those of you who aren't familiar, Earth Regenerators is built on an application called Mighty Networks. And this is what the group page looks like for our course, Prosocial Groups for Territories, which if you go to Mighty Networks and Earth Regenerators, on the left menu will be a section that says courses and pods. And that's where you'll find access to this course. Once you're in the course section, it looks like the main Earth Regenerator site, but the color and background are different. And I just want to point out a couple of features for those of you who are new, which is that when you arrive to this course, you can go to the table of contents where we have homework and activities to just help you deepen your knowledge and interact with people throughout the week. We have an activity feed of new content, which includes the announcement of new webinars and community calls and the homework assignments. That there are the events places where you go to sign up for the community calls and the webinars. That we encourage you to find other members and reach out to them personally and to start conversations with each other to continue from whatever may happen in the webinars or the community calls. And then as you find members, you can go to this place up here in the upper right, where you can see I have 11 notifications because I've got to catch up on my messages. But up there is where you can go and send messages to other members. So once you know someone's name, you can go and find them there, send them a message and start a conversation. And that messaging service works a lot like Facebook Messenger, if you're familiar with Facebook. So the idea is we encourage you to sign up for all of the events, or as many as you like, and to reach out to and connect with each other as much as feels good to you. And as you do this, you'll form relationships with each other. Also, I want to say something else, which is Earth Regenerators is not an organization. We are a community. No one is being paid here, including myself. Everyone who signs up for a learning journey is donating money to the Earth Regenerators Fund. And that money is used to pay for the books that we're going to send to each of you. And so you'll each receive a copy of my book as part of this learning journey. And the remaining money after the cost of the book and shipping will go into the Earth Regenerators Fund. And that means your host team, these 7 lovely people, including myself, we are all volunteers. We are all Earth Regenerators members. And we found that we learn a lot by being on the host team. So each of us has volunteered. So I just want you to see who your lovely hosts will be during the next 8 weeks. There's Maya and Benji, Irvi, Claire, Mila, Pamela, and myself. And so you can reach out to any of us if you have questions about this learning journey, or if you like help finding your way around Earth Regenerators. We are all people who know enough about Earth Regenerators to help you get started and help you take your next steps. And we'll be hosting the community calls to really help you have a great experience interacting with each other. So I just really wanted to celebrate and thank our host team, and you're going to love getting to know them. They're lovely people. And now I just want to end the presentation part of today's webinar by reminding us that nothing is separate. The entire Earth is an integrated whole, and all political boundaries are fictions. And what we want to do is learn how to relate to the whole of the planet and the planet's health by wherever we are in any place within the planet, by being in a territory in some specific location. And just as these clouds and the Earth's atmosphere moves and creates a dynamic dance at a planetary scale, so we can do this socially among each other as we learn to dance.
Joe, we can't hear because there's a lot of background noise. Coming from Louise.
Louise, could you please mute yourself because there's some
You can
background
mute
noise?
her.
I can't while I'm in share mode.
Oh.
But that's okay, because I'm leaving share mode, and then I can do that. So there we go. So that right there is the presentation for our opening webinar. And what I'd love to do is just invite a little bit of dialogue If you have any clarifying questions, this would be a good time to share them. And one way to share a question is you see on the bottom of your window, there's a button for reactions. If you go there and raise your hand, then we can address your questions one at a time as the hands come up. So I'd love to know if there are any questions that anyone has about what has been shared so far in this opening webinar. Are there any questions that people would like to know more about, or any clarification about how the learning journeys work, or about any of the material that I've shared in the last half an hour? Just wait a moment and hold this. I see Rainier. Yes, please. Rainier,
Yeah.
please come on.
My question, will we be joined by Paul or David Wilson on this journey?
Not on this one, no. Paul Atkins and David Sloan Wilson are part of Prosocial World, which is its own organization. And they're very good friends of mine, and we've collaborated together for the last 6 years. But they're not participants in this learning journey. They're hosting their own learning journey inspired by the way we do learning journeys here, which may create some confusion. If you go to Prosocial World, they've announced a learning journey that's starting in a few weeks, but that's their own learning journey that they're hosting for Prosocial World. So no, they won't be joining us in this learning journey. They have their own that they're running. Are there others here that have questions that you'd like to ask? Gail, please.
Hi, what an honor to be here. My question is really about this model, watching this whole model. And, you know, seeing many pieces come together for me during this conversation today. So thanks for that. But have you ever thought about putting it together for the Earthshot Prize that Prince William has put out there? Have you ever thought about that one? That's my question.
I have a very clear understanding of why I'm not interested in prize philanthropy and why I don't want to compete with other people who would be allies, and why the very structure of prize philanthropy, where you make a bunch of people compete with each other for what should form alliances, is profoundly devastating to us emotionally, psychologically, socially, and politically, for all of us building social movements. And I found in my life, because I speak the truth, and those who have accumulated wealth in the wealth hoarding system are pretty uncomfortable with the truth, that I make myself ineligible for any of their strategies and efforts. And so I would happily welcome them to have a spiritual awakening and bring resources to us, but I consider them unworth my time. And only those who seek to collaborate and co-create, rather than those who create the conditions of competition among those who need to collaborate. And I would say the Earthshot Prize is a great example of very intelligent people having immature hearts and conscience that are creating fragmentation, polarization, and competition because they just don't know any better.
Oh, I should have known this before I asked the question, but thank you for that. That's such a brilliant answer that, you know, it's one of the paradigms that needs to shift. Thank you.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Are there any other questions? Anyone else that has a question they'd like to share? And while we're waiting, I'll just say the X Prize a long time ago started trying to create social X Prizes, and not a single one of them has been successful for exactly this reason. They undermine their own ability to achieve their goals by structuring it as a prize, which is just an important thing to understand that they don't know. Jem, I see you have your hand raised, please.
The fellow that mentioned David, I mean, yeah, I've really been searching, and I never expected to find you guys doing this. And I'm totally not any kind of an ecological activist, and it really kind of never occurred to me. I'm focused on sort of the interior landscape of the body and its integration with society, which is, and I'm just very urban. So I am thrilled that you did all this work. And I am just so thrilled to be here because, of course, I need this like everyone does. But my experience with Prosocial, and even more radically with the Cultural Evolution Society, which is a strictly academic kind of, super heady kind of super limited and super boring often, kind of exciting, but in practice, it's just so boring. And it's just a lot of white guys with beards, and glasses and bookshelves behind them. And I love David Sloan Wilson and Paul Atkins. And I love the fact that they have a component that is social structure, that they have a component that is psychology, and that it is a more meditative kind of embodied psychology. And I just wonder what's the relationship. I think that everybody, from my perspective as a body-centered social theorist, is missing the importance of the body. And I think that that is part of this great, you call it a lingering falsehood. And so that's something that I hope to bring with me here. But I wonder what your thoughts are and how the Earth Regenerators kind of interact with the sort of approach to prosocial. And I know they have, I can't remember the name of it, a specific kind of ideas about community and the size of community from a scholar whom I can't remember. But I just wonder, rather than talking about theories and scholars, that what is your take on, what is your relationship with those prosocial folks? And I see you're very independent theoretically. I just kind of wonder just if you give a few moments to talk about that.
Yeah, happy to. And it turns out I'm very deeply connected to this. So just for everyone to know, David Sloan Wilson and I applied for and received a grant from the John Templeton Foundation in 2016. And we formed a team of scholars to create the Cultural Evolution Society. And just to be sure, it looks like I may lose signal. Can you guys all still hear me? So it got unstable for a second. And so we helped create the Cultural Evolution Society. And David and I strongly advocated for the Cultural Evolution Society to become practitioner focused. That it would weave the 500 academic institutions of the world that had faculty joining it, and the 2,400 academics that initially signed up. We really encouraged to do applied cultural evolution. And what happened was the person who became president of the society, the first president, actually backstabbed me and had me removed from a grant application, and then very carefully protected the Cultural Evolution Society from applications. That was Pete Richardson, in case you're wondering. I don't mind people publicly knowing that now. And one thing that happened was David Sloan Wilson, who was also with the Evolution Institute, then moved. He was already helping build Prosocial World, but he ceased to put his energy into the Cultural Evolution Society, even though he and I were two of the co-founders. David and I started the whole movement to form that society. And he and others started Prosocial World and spanned it out of Evolution Institute. And so just so you can see that this role of doing applied cultural evolution, which Prosocial World is very actively building capacity for creating practitioner communities that do this with research supports. And they've just received 2 Templeton grants to do this work, building a research network and practitioner networks. So they're very serious. And what I've done is what I always do, for those of you who know me. I just speak and practice based on what I consider to be the truth. And what I've gradually done is gathered around me those who think and feel the same way. And then we all fall in love with each other. And we start to do really awesome things because we all see the truth. And I don't mean the truth in some like ideological, religious sense, but like, for example, that abrupt climate change is already occurring and it's not 10 years in the future. That's truth. Those of us who see that can find each other. And so just as one little example. And so to wrap this part up, because I want to invite Val to speak in a moment, is that Earth Regenerators is actively co-creating with Prosocial World in the background. For 2 years now, we've been sending people from this community to be trained there. And a lot of us here are trained facilitators, including myself. And several members of Prosocial World, including Paul Atkins, have taken our learning journeys and have taken inspiration from it. And we have a team that's collaborating with Prosocial World to bring it into communities in Latin America, led by a lot of the work that I'm doing here in Colombia along with a few other alliance partners spread throughout South America. So just to say that in the background, a lot of these relationships have already been forming, and none of them are connected with the Cultural Evolution Society because its immune response said, protect the science from being applicable. And they've cut themselves off from the blood supply of legitimacy. And so even though it's fantastic scholarly research. So with that said, Val, please.
Hi, Joe. Good to see you again. Gail's question and your response touched on something that's really pivotal for me. And I know in the work that I'm doing, which is all about more, I would say, the interior landscape that aligns with the exterior landscape and making sure that there is a river flowing between those. But I think my spidey sense is pretty good for when I see the old paradigm of separation and competition operating, but sometimes I still get caught. And there's so many great sounding ideas that actually are working in the old paradigm of separation and competition. And they can be tricky. And I know how much you trust your somatic sense of truth. So that's my question is, can you maybe elaborate a little more on your spidey sense and truth and when we're overgrowing the old paradigm of separation and when we're actually maybe getting tricked?
This is a great question, Val. It's like awesome. I just like to begin by saying that part of this is how do we cultivate intuition in our bodies? And so one good place to develop intuition in your body is doing mindfulness practice and meditation. Another is to do martial arts. Another is to do yoga. Another is just to do dance or theater or any kind of body-based art. And so any of these body-based practices will help you to cultivate knowing in your body. So for example, method acting. What you do is you relive experiences you've had in the past and pay attention to how your body emotionally responds. And then you reenact those feelings to perform those emotions. And those are very realistic acting expressions. So to do that means you need to actually pay attention to what your body is doing. And you need to learn how to trust your body as a communication, which is a two-way street. I learn how to communicate with my body as part of my body, and then my body becomes more integrated so that as I communicate more as my body. Which is really just saying I haven't blocked myself off from parts of my ways of knowing. And so I wanted to stress that insight that one of the really key things about doing this work is we're going to discover when we try to do pro-social things in our communities, that there are emotional blockages in the traumas of other people and in ourselves that will keep us from collaborating. And that a surprising amount of this work is going to be body-based trauma healing within ourselves and each other. I would say a surprising amount. It's more than we realize. Because we may think, oh, that river is contaminated because we cut down all the trees and we threw all the plastic in it, as if the river is the problem. But there's a practice of the indigenous people here in the Northern Andes that's really exemplified by the Kogi people of Santa Marta, which is anytime they arrive in a community, before they go to the town, they go to the river. They go to the river because they can discern the level of conscience of the people by looking at the river. So if they come to Barichara, they'll see a dead river with toilet water being dumped directly into the river, feces and urine, without filtering anything, and they're going to see the conscience of the people living here. So this is a very, very powerful thing, is that if you cultivate in your body an understanding of systemic health, then you will see when things are not healthy. Your body will just be like, ugh, I feel the unhealthiness of that. And so this relationship to the inner landscape, as you called it, of our own body sense making and our relationship to the world, it's the intersection of those is where the regenerative work needs to be done. And so we're going to find that as we explore pro-social groups, it's not just getting people to cooperate as if they're objects and automatons. It's changing the psychological dynamics within our selves and the sociological dynamics between us and the ecological dynamics among all of us in the more than human world, all together in one process. And that is the only way to do this work. So that's a flavor. We'll explore it a lot further as we go, but I want to just be mindful of time
Thanks,
for this
Joe.
first session. We're at the allotted time of 1 hour for this webinar, but I just want to invite if there are any other questions before we close today. If there are, I'd love to take them. So just let me know. And if not, if there aren't any more questions, what I'd like to say is that, yes.
It's
Who has
Sherry.
a question? Sherry? Okay, Sherry and then Chris, because Chris raised
Okay,
his hand.
awesome.
Sherry, please.
Well, first of all, I just want to say I am so happy to be here. I think that's really important. And I've been looking for a place that cross-pollinates both of these aspects because I'm someone who's loved the earth and cares about the land and healing. And I don't see I see there's like so much fragmentation. Exactly, your kind of that incorrect map is still very dominant in the regeneration world, particularly where funds need to go. Let's save the wilderness, let's protect the things, which is all good, but it's a both and. And I'm curious if, and you can just say, yes, it's going to be coming up, or yeah, we've explored that before, but it feels like that educational component is, I mean, I'm connected to a lot of those people, and I realize I have to be an ambassador of this. So I'm just curious about how much we kind of work with that, because it's the you know, I'm a pro-social girl, so that I've got down, but I'm also always needing the learning communities to actually put it into practice. So that you're actually doing it on land, and that there are all these people who are attracted, like we're a little node, and that we can, I really see the bioregional learning centers is like, I had never heard that quote from Donella Meadows, and I'm like, oh my God. So I guess that's maybe you can respond to that.
Yeah, what I want to say is that it's like that old expression, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. That what we do is create affinity that attracts those who are ready, and don't waste our time on anyone else. There is zero persuasion. Just don't waste any effort. And that strategic awareness helps us sort of know where we do and where we don't spend our time. We sort of prune away from ourselves what isn't going to help us, just through selective attention, you know?
That's perfect. That's really perfect. And that actually relates to, in evolutionary biology, the imaginal cells that are in the chrysalis and of humanity, social chrysalis, and they find each other through resonance. So yeah, we don't need to be like forcing people to do what they're not ready to do, but we can plant a lot of seeds, which I think then the readiness will probably go.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's a great question, and we will be exploring more of how to do this, or how some of us are already attempting to do it and what we're learning, because I'm sure a lot of people who are signed up as participants have experience to share. Chris, I'd love to hear from you.
Hi, I just have a really practical question. I find the platform to be kind of confusing, and like there's so many aspects, so many things going on, events, courses, pods. Like I don't have a good map of it. Is there a resource or a link to kind of learn how the online platform experience is structured, and how I can because I find that I pull it up and I'm like, okay, where am I trying to even go here? And how do I interact with this pod or this course, or what's it even called? All that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's a great question. We've created some of these like brief walkthrough tutorials in the past. And what I can do is I can talk with the host team and see which of us has time in the next few days so we can get one created quickly. And just do like a screen capture video that walks through it. I think that's the easiest way, at least for the course. For Earth Regenerators as a community is a little different story, because It's always evolving and new things are emerging. And we're actually at a specific place in our evolution right now where a lot of the groups are forming things called pods, which basically just means they're creating focused smaller groups that take new action. And those are sort of coming and going. Some of them are longstanding, some of them only last a week. It's very dynamic. And that's just because that's what is appropriate to what they're doing. And so it can be a little confusing when you see that, because we're like more than 2 years into building a real community, like not just a community trademark. And what that means is real communities are messy and always changing. But yeah, and Gail just mentioned that our friend PJ had made a walkthrough at one point in time. We can go and try and dig that up too and share it in the course section for everyone so that you can find it and watch it. But also,
Yeah,
you can reach out to
that's
anyone on
the
the host
challenge.
team as well. Like anyone on the host team can help anyone who has specific questions in addition to that. But yeah, Chris, what were you going to say? Sorry.
Well, I was just saying, yeah, that's definitely the sort of challenge I'm trying to navigate is expanding into the community from the learning journey and figuring out where I can do that and how I can do that. And definitely that kind of like threshold there is what I'm talking about navigating.
If it's hard for you, it's probably hard for lots of people.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can say what we've done so far is it's through human chaperones. Like I've already talked with Pamela, who's on the host team, about being an ambassador between this learning journey and the bioregional catalyst group, because she knows a lot. She knows pretty much everything that's happening there. She's very active in that space, and she's on the host team. So partly it's just saying, if you want to know more about bioregional catalysts, talk to Pamela. If you want to know about the project Incubator, talk to PJ. It's sort of, we'll connect you with the person who will help you find your way, but you may not know that that's the place you want to be. And if you don't know where you want to be, talk to me. It's like, Joe, can we have a call? Because maybe you'll know, this is what I'm working on. And I want to just really emphasize for everyone here that what Chris is suggesting is actually what we want to do, is create social supports for each other to get to where we need to be. So proactively reach out to us when you have these questions. Don't just think you're going to be like annoying us or bothering us. We want to help you find your way to the people that are going to be good for you. So, and Irvi's raised her hand. So Irvi, please.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Oh, yes, of course. Oh, wait. Yes, Chris, we're good for now. Yeah. And hi, you're Chris's wife, right? I don't know your name. Hello.
Hi, I'm Amelia. And
Amelia, nice to meet you.
yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you. Can I ask a quick question?
Please.
You mentioned a body, I don't remember the exact words, body-based, what was it?
Like body-based
practice for, yeah, what's an example of that?
I'll give a really simple example, and everyone can join me if you like. Sit really comfortably and take a nice deep breath in through your nose. And then gently breathe out through your mouth. Just notice doing that once, you feel calm and you feel more calm and more centered. That is a body-based practice for grounding and centering yourself. You can do more than one breath, but I just wanted to show you how easy it is. It's so natural.
And that's an example of becoming more in touch with your intuition?
Yeah, that's an example of a mindfulness practice to connect your feeling of your mind and your body through focused breathing, which you might put under the category of meditation. But the important thing is that you are actually creating synchronicity within your body by doing it. The different parts of your body and its physiology will come together the more you do that. So something as simple as calmly focusing on breathing in and breathing out and feeling calming thoughts will change your brain and your biochemistry, and your body will start to integrate itself differently. And that's just one practice out of thousands. But basic breathing is so important. That's just an example of what I was referring to.
Also, I missed a bunch of this course today because I was waiting to be let in. Do you know what happened with that?
I don't know what happened with that, but we will figure it out.
Okay, and then do you know if
It's
there's
recorded too.
mentor opportunities within this network for specific projects?
Yep, we have a place called the Regenerative Project Incubator, and they host advisory circles where you can basically say, my project is this, who could help me with it? And then people come and give you advice, and then you can ask people to be mentors. That's one of the
Okay,
ways
cool.
that we provide social supports in the community. And it's all free, it's all volunteer, it's all gift economy. We just help each other. So yeah, great question. A great example of the kinds of things we already have been doing that you can get help with. Irvi, on to you, please.
I don't have a question. I just wanted to quickly respond to Chris and say that as someone who I did my first learning journey, just a few months ago, and then kind of went through that phase quite recently of then learning to navigate ER more broadly. So I'd be happy to talk to anyone about that transition, sort of going from learning journey to engaging with the community more broadly, if helpful. So I'm just putting it out there as an offer.
Thank you, Irvi. And also Irvi is a nice example of someone who joined Earth Regenerators through one of these learning journeys and then found she could step into leadership as she felt comfortable and join the host team for this learning journey. So you can just see how collaborative we are here. I'm really glad that Irvi's here. So I want to just sort of close because we're now, we've been here for an hour and 15 minutes and a few people have already needed to leave. And I want to just say that this is the first webinar and we're going to explore different formats for the webinars so that we can really benefit from the knowledge and the experience of a lot of people in our community. And that another thing that we take very seriously is we do emergent facilitation of our learning journeys, which means from 1 week to the next, we don't know the topic of the next webinar. We're going to be listening as the host team to what happens in the community calls and feel into what is most appropriate for us to continue learning as a community for the next week. And we're going to accumulate that through the 8 weeks. And that is another way of saying that we are very much process focused more than content focused. We will recruit the content that is most helpful to where our process is, instead of pretending to know what is the best content ahead of time, without responding to what is most important to you in any given moment. So there might be a thematic area that's important to you, but there's a specific week where something is happening in the lives of enough of us that we integrate it into what happens next. And that we very mindfully and intentionally do that. And so, and I think you'll experience the more authentic way that the content will feel relevant to all of us because we're co-creating it with you the entire time. And I just wanted to name that so you would be aware that there's no roster of what the upcoming topics are. We don't know until the host team meets the day after the community calls, and we assess together what patterns we've seen to see what might be the most helpful next topic for the next webinar. And we do that intentionally so that we can engage with what is emerging. And so we're going to be practicing that kind of social weaving, which is very similar to what needs to happen in territories and bioregions. We'll be practicing among us as participants in the next 8 weeks, starting with the first community call tomorrow. So just want to say thank you all for being here today. The recording of this I will upload sometime later today so that you can go back to the event announcement of this webinar, and in the comment thread below you can find the recording so that you can watch it again. And I also want to invite you that if there's anyone you think should see one of these webinars, even though we're keeping them unlisted now for the sake of privacy within the group, and we're not going to be recording the community calls, that everything that I do personally is open access and freely available. So if you feel like there's someone you know who's not part of this learning journey that should see today's webinar, once the recording is posted, go ahead and share the link. I do not have any propriety over this. I would rather that it's shared to whomever it would be most helpful to. So just know that you are welcome to do that and encouraged if that feels like something you want to do. So with that said, I just want to say thank you so much for being here. I'm really excited to begin this new journey with all of you. And so is Sasha, the dog. Sasha's mostly excited that Ksenia's cooking something yummy, but maybe it's because we're here too, I don't know. But looking forward to what we're going to do together. And I'm really excited to get started with all of you. So thank you, everyone, and see you in the community calls. All right, bye for now.
Open mics and say goodbye.
Open your
Bye.
mics
Thank
and say
you.
goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thank
you. See ya.
Bye, everyone.
Hi, thank you. Bye and thanks.